Yes, I see a thumbs up. Excellent. Cool. Well, yeah, I'm very happy to be here. My cat's happy as well. But yeah, happy to be joining you virtually. I'm hoping to be able to make it back to Melbourne for an in-person DDD again soon. But I've also have 1.5-year-old twin girls, which make traveling across the country difficult as well. But I'm happy to be joining you virtually tonight. So tonight I'll be talking about automating Azure AI services with Bicep. I just have this one slide and the rest of it is a demo. But also if I'm going close over time, please give me some signal because I could talk about this for quite a while. But Slido is up on the screen. There's also a link there to the resources. I'll put this back up at the end. So I'm going to go straight to just starting with what is Bicep. I know not all of you might have, you might not have heard of Bicep before, but basically it's a templating language to be able to deploy your Azure resources. So if you are automating any sort of infrastructure as code to deploy to Azure, Bicep is a really great tool to help you to be able to do that. And basically what happens is behind the scenes with Bicep, it transpiles into your Azure Resource Manager or your ARM templates. So if you've worked with Bicep in the past or worked with Azure deployments, you've probably worked with ARM. And Bicep is a domain-specific language on top of ARM that helps you to make declaring your resources a little bit nicer. So it's a bit of a nicer development experience. It has built-in syntax, and there's some tools within things like your Visual Studio Code that can make it easier to define your Azure resources as code so you have repeatable automated deployments. This page on the screen here is just the Microsoft Learn document. So you can go through and read more about Bicep. It talks about some of those benefits that I mentioned as well. But the syntax as an example, so the Bicep syntax is on the screen here. Oh, can you see it? It looks like, can you see the Bicep page? I think I might be sharing. Resume my presentation. Hold on. Let's see. Can you see my my slide, or can you see the Azure resource page? I'm going to stop presenting because what I see in the screen share, I think, is not the right thing. So I'll share my whole window, and hopefully that should do it. Entire screen. Let's say screen 3. There we go. Let's see. There we go. It looks like you can see the right thing now. Cool. Awesome. I wasn't telling you, I was just telling you what was basically on this page, but it's the Microsoft Learn documentation. So the format for Bicep is it's declaring your resources. So you can pass in parameters, so things like the location, where you want your resources deployed. You can have things like string interpolation, and so you have different variables in there and that kind of stuff. But the main format is you say resource, you declare some sort of name to represent what the resource is going to be for you. And then here you're referencing the ARM template API. So the Microsoft.storage/storage account part of this behind the scenes tells Bicep this is going to transpile into this specific type of Azure Resource Manager declaration. And so then it knows what format it's looking for, and it's able to do that nice transpilation for you. And then you pass in the properties that are required. So often name, location, in this case, it's things like a SKU and all of that. If you take a look at what ARM format looked like before, it was a type of JSON format that we had to kind of fit our variables and parameters and some sort of, you know, if you wanted an if statement, that kind of stuff, you had to kind of squish it into the JSON format, and it was a bit hard to work with, and you ended up with a bunch of kind of extra stuff. So that's why Bicep was created, to make that experience a little bit nicer for you. So, so that's Bicep. I'll obviously be talking about it more as we go through, but just high level why it's useful to use. But I will specifically want to talk about how you can, so I just scroll back up to how you can deploy some of your Azure AI services with Bicep. And as the example that I'll be using today, I'm actually using a free open source Azure sample. I'll share the link for this at the end, but this is an OpenAI chat app quick start that's available on the Azure samples. So afterwards, you can jump in and dig into the code if you're interested. But the resources that are defined within this project are a very simple sort of AI chat application, which is a Python app. But the part I'm interested in is the Azure architecture, which is deployed and defined within this project through Bicep. So what it defines for you is to host the app, they're using Azure container apps. So they have a container apps environment and container apps registry, which is where you upload the image, and that's how it gets hosted. They're using managed identity for secure communication between the application and the OpenAI service. And obviously, there's then the Azure AI service, and this is using Azure OpenAI for the AI service. And there's also some information around different models that are in there. So this project has the Bicep already written in there. So we're going to jump into that and take a look. One thing I do want to mention about this sample, which is really nice, is that it comes set up with GitHub code spaces and VS Code dev containers, which is like a hosted development environment for you that has all the tools and everything set up, so you don't have to set it up on your machine. So it's nice to go in and play around if you haven't used it before. So I've set it up on my machine within a VS Code dev container. There's a whole bunch of resources defined in different files here. This is similar to the one we were just looking at, a simple sort of log analytics where we have the resource declaration, we have some outputs and all of that. And then the way that these resources are often referenced when it's created in a separate file like this, it's actually called a reference as a module. So you can sort of group things logically within your infrastructure as code declaration within a module. So if there's different pieces that are always going together, you can put it together in this file, similar to how they have here. They're having these parameters and you want to output certain things. And then the way that's referenced within the main file is you call module, and then you're referencing the file location to within your project where that resource was declared. And you pass in the parameters that it's required here. And in terms of the way the parameters work, you can go up one level above and you have a different types of parameter files that Bicep can read in as well. So here's some parameters for what we'll be using with the OpenAI model name and that kind of stuff. And as you get more advanced with your infrastructure as code and automated deployments, you can, have your GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps library environment variables put into these templates for different types of environments. And Bicep really allows you to be quite flexible with how you've set up these deployments, but being able to do it in a really repeatable, robust way. And they try to make it as reusable as possible. So you can even do things like have these module declarations. You can have them in a way that you can use it across different projects and have company-specific modules that you're using if there's things that you're repeating quite a lot. So Bicep is really quite powerful in the things that you can do. But we want to talk about, obviously, more on the AI side of things and how you can use Bicep to declare your AI. So if I go back to, well, first I'll start by going to this cognitive services Bicep file. I've actually removed sort of the key part here for us to add it in together. But one thing to note is cognitive services was the sort of general term that Microsoft was originally using for, well, their cognitive services, but that's now transformed into what they're calling all of their AI services. So you'll see references to cognitive services within sort of the Bicep documentation, and even the Azure CLI commands still use cognitive services as the key word to cover all of the AI services. But that's things like OpenAI and doing some of like your visual facial analysis and some of those other sort of, cognitive services that they have. So within this cognitive services file, we're taking in a whole bunch of parameters. Some of these will be some of the parameters that we've passed in from here. And I am within my Visual Studio Code. And one thing to note as well is that I have a Bicep extension that I've installed from within the marketplace, which is really helpful in helping to declare your resources. So if you're going to use Visual Studio and write Bicep, I'd recommend getting that. I do also have a Copilot as well, so it'll try and autocomplete things for me as I go through. But I'll start typing this, and I just want to do this. So if I go, obviously start typing Microsoft, there's this autocomplete thing that's happening, and this is all of the resources that you can define within your Bicep. So obviously there's a whole lot there, but if you're not quite sure the naming, this can be really helpful. So for example, the one we actually want here is called Cognitive Services /accounts. So if you know, hey, I want something within Cognitive Services, I'm creating an OpenAI service, what could it be called? You can look through the different options here, and that can help point you in the right direction of what you're looking for. And it gives you some nice, sort of testing to make sure that you're following the right thing. There's also autocomplete for the different API versions. So they're always evolving the templates and the way the resource management is declared. So you can go in and say, oh, I'm actually using an older template, an older API version. Let me use a newer one. There might be some new features available, that kind of thing. I'm just going to go ahead and put in.
Lisa?
Yes.
3 minutes left.
Oh, shit. 3 minutes. Okay, cool. That's all right. Go ahead and, sorry, my apologies for my words. So yeah, so you can go ahead and finish that, but it's really nice. I would definitely say go and look in this. One of the things with the models is they're under their separate deployments. And as you declare the deployments in here, we are passing in a loop of all of the deployments that we want. So here we have an array where we've defined, we want to deploy the ones from the parameters, and I've just manually deployed one here for the turbo model. And then we have a for loop where we're going through those different sort of model definitions and deploying them. There are problems if you try to deploy too many at once, and it just falls over, so you have to say batch size 1. One thing that's really, I would say, a thing that people get broken up over is, or like it trips them up, is the model availability. So you can go to different places to check the models. You can go to the OpenAI service model webpage, see the new models that have come out to see if it's one that you might want to use within your app. You can see in here, they tell you about the different capabilities to see if that's something that works for you. And then you can also check the availability. So the availability of the models really, it varies by location. So being in Australia, we don't get all the models as early as some of the other places. So if you want to use Australia East, you need to make sure that that model is available. Another thing that trips people up a lot of the times is the quota. So each user is only designated a certain type of quota to use different types of models. If you're a big business, your quota is a lot higher. You can check your quota within, if you're in the Azure portal, I've already deployed all the resources here. You can open up something that is called the AI Foundry portal. And this is you could talk about this one for hours, but there's a whole bunch of ways to interact with models here. But you can also check your quota and see if you've used up the quota for that model in that region, or what you still have available. So for GPT-4o, for example, I can dig into here and figure out what quota I have available. I've used 0 of my 8,000 tokens per minute that's allocated to my user. So there's a whole bunch of things. Obviously, I could talk for ages about the AI model deployments. this project is really good. They have deployment steps that you can follow. As I said, if you set it up within dev containers or within the GitHub code spaces, you don't have to install any of the tools. I would definitely recommend going in here and checking it out. I do have an hour-long version of this talk that I've done with on the Microsoft New Breakpoint Developer Show that you can watch. And obviously, I go into a whole lot more depth of all the different things with Azure AI models and what it's like to deploy them, different problems you might have. But yeah, definitely something that you guys can go check out outside of this. Yeah, so I can go back to this slide, which has a link to the resources, including the recording for the talk and the demo project that I was talking through. And obviously, there's the link to the questions there as well. So yeah, happy to take questions if there's time.
Thank you, Melissa. We've got a few questions. So first of all, Dave asks a question, why did Microsoft create another language to mimic Terraform when they could have used TypeScript or other languages like AWS CDK or Pulumi? Acknowledging that you might not be able to answer that question.
Yeah, I should preface this by saying I do not work for Microsoft, so I do not know the exact reasoning. I would say, Terraform obviously is owned by another company, it's HashiCorp, so it was probably Microsoft saying we want a Microsoft thing, and also them recognizing that people do have some difficulties working with ARM, especially, I mentioned you could do for loops and if statements, that kind of thing. Those were getting quite complex with the way ARM was declared, and people were kind of, turning to tools like Terraform. So I think Microsoft was probably like, oh, we'll create a, our version equivalent to that for the Azure resources. That's my best guess.
I think we can all agree that we don't want to live in a world where there's only one thing for everything, or you end up with Woolworths and Coles type situations.
Yeah.
Somebody has said Bicep looks really nice, much better than ARM templates. If we have a lot of ARM templates, is there a way to easily convert them to Bicep?
That's a good question. I probably actually would use some of the AI coding tools that are there now. So like I have GitHub Copilot, and it's quite powerful in what it does, and especially in something that's really template based, such as Bicep and ARM. So because behind the scenes, Bicep transpiles into ARM, so it would make sense that an AI or computer tool would be able to do the opposite for you as well. I haven't tried it, but that would be a good option to check out.
Yeah, exactly. And that actually leads into the next question, which I think the answer is yes. Has anyone used AI, e.g. Copilot, to set up modular declaration, the JSON file you shared, the Bicep file, etc.? So, yes.
Yeah, you definitely can. I would say just be careful about trusting it, because I found it useful to have both the Bicep extension and GitHub Copilot, because there'd be times Copilot would suggest something, and then the Bicep extension was doing some syntax validation and linting and said, hey, wait a minute, that property doesn't belong in this section, like it's actually wrong. So you can't just blindly trust the AI. It does help point you in the right direction if you're a little bit stuck on where to go next. But you definitely still need to use your development skills and reach out to the docs and that kind of stuff to figure out the proper setup, I think.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much for that, Melissa. Get a round of applause again.
Thank you for having me.